Well, thank you all for coming. My name is Justin Sawell. I'm from the Brisbane Electric Vehicle Assn. Hopefully we've all got tea and coffee in the loo, know where it is. Just by way of housekeeping, Neil has asked if you would like to be notified about future developments in the Electric Vehicle Society. There's a pad and pen on the table there. If you'd just like to leave some details, whether it's a phone number, a postal address or email address, we'll put you on the list and keep you up to date. There's some information there that I've printed out off the internet, just dealing with electric vehicles and gasoline related information that you may be interested in. So I've just got a few comments to introduce the big picture of why we're all here today, and then I'll get Ben to come up and give about a half an hour presentation on Better Place, after which there'll be time for questions, comments, looking at the electric vehicles and so on. My first point is pollution. I don't need to say much about it. It's been on the agenda for a long time. Carbon monoxide, organic gases, asthma, pollution, acid rain. I'm not going to talk about climate change. We've all been bombarded with that information, but I guess the simplest idea is imagine stick a hose from the exhaust pipe into your car, get in, shut the windows and doors and turn the engine on, see how long we last. Okay? We're doing that to the planet. Okay? It can't continue forever, so we need to do something about it. The second issue facing the transport industry is fuel shortages. We saw recently the price of oil went to $140 a barrel. And there's this concept going around called the peak oil extraction risk. In 2005 in England, the truck drivers were upset about the high cost and the high tax on fuel, and they blockaded some oil refineries to prevent the petrol tankers going out to deliver petrol to the petrol stations. Well, within a week, most of the UK had come to a standstill. Shops were being stripped of food, people were stealing fuel from the nurses' cars in hospital car parks. And the Sun newspaper was screaming, "We'll run dry today." Okay? The Environmental Minister was dispatched to Balmoral to get emergency powers from the Queen, and they were on the verge of declaring martial law when Tony Blair managed to broker a deal with the oil companies and the protesters, and they dismantled the pickets and the fuel proceeded. So it only took a week with a fuel shortage to bring poor London and the UK to its knees. And the scary thing is, what happens if the geology of the Earth means we run out of oil on a global scale, particularly cheap oil, which is what our society is built on. Okay, oil doesn't just fuel our cars. Okay, there's plastics, clothing, medicines, everything that we see around us is a product of this cheap oil that we've had for 100 years. And when oil becomes more expensive, our whole way of life is put at risk. People are reporting large quantities of oil in the surface of the Earth, and it's largely irrelevant, because I've learned that this is Saad al-Husseini. He's the former VP of Aramco, the Saudi Arabian oil company. In 2007, he said world reserves are confused and inflated. He's actually admitting that the Arab countries lie about their reserves. Many of the reserves are resources. They're not delineated, they're not accessible, they're not available for production. So the large amount of oil in the surface of the Earth is largely irrelevant. The extraction is the key. How much of that can we get out cheaply and turn it into stuff that we can use? Lord Brown, who's the chairman of BP, says that there's 40 years of oil and gas provided the right investments are made at the right time. And he's quite right, but that's a big if. Provided the right investments are made, because most of that oil left over is in Iran. And do the Iranians like us very much? No. The second largest quantity of oil is in Iraq. Okay? Since the last couple of years, that production's halved. So there are issues involved with getting the right investments to the oil. All of the cheap, easy oil is gone. It's rather like a crunchy bar. I used to think that oil in the ground was like an underground lake, and you just drilled down and sucked it up like you were sucking water out of a dam. But apparently it's not like that. It's like a crunchy bar. The oil is held inside tiny pumice-like rock under immense pressure. And so what happens is you drill down into that rock and the pressure forces the liquid up the pipe. Okay, it's a bit like you put your hand over a can of Coke and shake it, and what happens? It erupts. Okay, so the pressure forces the liquid out. But my question is, how much Coke stays in the bottle after you've taken your thumb off? Okay, more than half. Okay, so the problem for the oil companies is when they tap that oil reserve, the pressure starts falling from the moment the first barrel comes up the pipe. There are options. You can drill another well a little bit further away and pump down water or natural gas or steam to increase the flow, increase the pressure in the reservoir. But all that does is accelerates the decline. Okay, so you can lower an electric pump down, that artificial lift is limited. So the battle that oil companies are constantly fighting against is this depletion. Once you tap the oil, the pressure starts falling, and once the pressure's gone, it's very difficult to get the rest of the oil out. And typically that's 50% or more. In 2005, Bill Cummings, ExxonMobil company spokesman, says that easy oil and gas has pretty much been found. We've got it. Now comes the harder work, finding and producing oil from more challenging environments and work areas, like the shale oil that we're talking about in North America, the Alaskan Wildlife Reserve, drilling in ultra-deep water. Okay, that's all very expensive and it consumes a lot of energy to produce. Okay, that was in 2005, he said all the cheap oil's gone. What happened 3 years later? The price went up to $140 a barrel. Finally, there's different types of oil. Okay, the light sweet crude is what we use to turn quickly into gasoline and plastic and rubber for our car tyres. Okay, but that's not what the Saudis and the Iraqis and the Iranians have. They've got heavy sour oil in their reservoirs, which costs a lot more and takes specialised refineries to refine. Okay, so the alternatives that we've got, this massive amount of oil and gas that people are talking about, actually isn't accessible. And what is accessible is much more expensive to produce. Meaning, in the future, unless we have an alternative, transport costs are going to increase significantly. Here's a quick graph of oil production, world oil production from 1930 to about 1980. It goes up exponentially as we find that oil and we suck it out of the ground. Excuse me. Coming towards 2000, it starts to slacken off. Although we're still producing more oil, the rate at which we produce it is declining because the pressure in those reservoirs is declining and that affects the production. Hubbard predicted that the US would peak in 1970 and it did. And he used maths, which is fairly simple. It's spelled out in his book I read, The Last Oil Shop in Australia. There's a few books around on peak oil. The maths is fairly simple and inevitably there is a decline projected that looks like that. Because simply once you get half the oil out, the other half is much more difficult to extract because the reservoir pressure is so low. But that dotted line at the top